Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today we're taking a look at the Christopher Ward C1000 Typhoon chronograph. This is a pretty new watch from the brand. It's been out for a few months now, and it's kind of one of their more higher end watches. We've looked at some of their kind of upper level watches, which they've, typically have in-house complications they co-design, such as their mono pusher or the world timer. This one they've done something different with, which is actually focus on materials. So this is a ceramic case over a titanium subframe. Ceramic is a really interesting material for watch cases. It's very, very scratch resistant. It's much, much harder than steel. I believe it can shatter, but they actually claim this to be virtually indestructible. That's their words on their site. It has a very interesting presence, and it's a material that you'll more commonly see on higher end brands such as IWC and Omega. So it's interesting for them to do it. This is one of the more expensive watches though, coming in at $2,060, but it has that interesting element to it. It's also powered by a Valjoux 7750 chronograph, which is a great chronograph movement, sapphire crystal, and just a very cool looking watch with some other interesting details. So let's take a closer look. The case of the C1000 Typhoon has a very classic pilot style. It's 42 millimeters in diameter, 51.5 millimeters lug to lug, 15 millimeters tall. It has a flat sapphire crystal, so it is fairly tall from the bezel to the actual case back, with the 20 millimeter lugs here. So yeah, I mean, it has a classic design. You have these kind of long, thick lugs that angle or slope in, and a fairly wide bezel here. But really, of course, makes it interesting is the ceramic material. They say it's ceramic over a titanium subframe. I'm not 100% sure if that means it's really a titanium case with a ceramic coating over it, or if it's got like a a titanium like movement holder, and then the case is full ceramic. They're just a little bit vague about that. But really what you're getting is a very hard surface finish with an interesting matte texture to it. It's very, very scratch resistant, 7 times harder than steel. And the matte black, it actually comes across almost like a charcoal gray. It's definitely a little bit different than what you see in a PVD or a DLC. I do feel like it looks kind of ceramic, and it's just, it's a very, very nice black. The pushers and the crown are actually titanium though, and they do match it nicely, though they're perhaps a little bit more metallic looking. The crown here is a very large 8 millimeter wide kind of onion style crown, but it's entirely round, as you can see. So it actually is easier to grasp than I thought it would be, since it doesn't have any facets. One interesting thing, and it's probably going to be very hard to see here, is on the inside of it, in that little angle there, are slight little kind of triangular shapes that have been taken out, and that's meant to kind of emote the jets of the actual Typhoon airplane, which they also do on the dial a little bit. Perhaps the coolest feature of the case, though, and maybe my favorite feature of the watch, is this amazing emblem on the back. So that is actually the Typhoon plane there. As I say, Typhoon FGR4 Multi-Role Combat. This is one of the most detailed engravings I've ever seen on a watch. I wouldn't be surprised if there's actually a separate element that is made differently and then kind of built into this, like it's almost attached to the case. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And obviously you don't see it when you're looking at the watch unless you take the watch off, but it's really, really cool that it's there. The dial of the C1000 definitely has a classic pilot style, modern pilot style to it. So you'll see some very familiar markings. The primary index here, which is a minute index, is large numerals and a very, very clean font, as you can see. And then on the outside of that, you have dashes, white dashes for the individual minutes, and then a kind of a pale blue every 5. And then at 12, you do have a triangle with 2 dots, which is kind of like the classic, pilot watch marker there. This is a Valjoux 7750 chronograph, as I mentioned before. So it has the sub-register for 30 minutes at 12, and then a 12-hour register at 6. Usually you would have an active seconds at 9 and a date at 3, but they eliminated those for a cleaner look, I'd imagine. So yeah, when the chronograph's not running, it is very, very still. The sub-registers are definitely the most interesting elements on the dial. You have this kind of inlaid charcoal, or not inlaid, but rather applied charcoal ring around each of the sub-dials. So it has this cool little effect, and there's little notches in there. And like the markings on the crown, that's actually meant to kind of look like an afterburner, kind of like a jet intake. It definitely adds a little bit to it. I think that this dial is actually kind of a little flat, and considering the plane that it's based on, the Typhoon, which is so intense and so modern, that my one negative comment would just be that this isn't quite as aggressive as I think the inspiration it's drawing from. It's still very clean, very, very nice and handsome and well proportioned. I just personally, when I hear this C1000 Typhoon, I just want like something super kind of brutal, a little bit more like, you know, some of the Sin chronographs, which are much more modern. There's two versions of the dial now. This was the first one, and it has this baby blue kind of powder pink RAF roundel here, and that's, you know, obviously British military. And it's the pale colors are actually, I think, relate to being kind of like a low visibility, you know, so kind of not camo, but something that doesn't really like scream too loudly if it's on something in combat. So that's where those colors come from. They are a little bit funny. I mean, it's a very pale blue. The other dial version is just black in there, so that definitely would be a little bit meaner, a little bit more fierce looking, which I do think would play towards, you know, just the overall concept of the watch. I do like the pale blue on the outside though. I think that was a nice touch. The hands then are these kind of classic Roman sword hands, but very modern. So they're long. They're a bit aggressive. I like that, and they're actually kind of a gunmetal color, which you might be able to see, which is a nice change from like steel or just a matte black. I think it's just a little bit more subtle. It stands off the dial a little bit. And then the chronograph second hand here has I believe it's called the Delta wing shape. So you can see the counterweight here is kind of looks like the Typhoon plane. So that just kind of brings it back onto the dial. Yeah, I mean, overall, like I said, it's a very nice, very clean dial and very, you know, easy to read and everything like that. Just wish it was a little bit more aggressive. The C1000 wears very well on the wrist. You know, it's a 42 millimeter, which I think is a right size for kind of a sportier pilot chronograph. You know, you'd see them maybe 40 millimeters would have been another option, but I think this has a little bit more. It needs a little bit more of an aggressive presence, and because it has, you know, this matte black case, I think it visually looks a little bit smaller. I think it fits. I have a 7-inch wrist. And nothing is, you know, too long on it. So yeah, you know, it's a comfortable watch to wear. It's not that heavy either, you know, because it's ceramic and titanium, which I think are both a little bit lighter than a solid steel case would have been. So it's quite comfortable in that aspect. And looking at it, you know, like I said, it's just a very kind of precise, clean-looking pilot chronograph. Very legible, very clear. It's handsome. It's sporty. Obviously, you know, I think any black watch is going to definitely be sportier than a steel watch would be. So you get that look, but it's not over the top. You know, I mean, I personally kind of, like I said, wish it was a little more aggressive, but it's not, you know, too sporty to not be appropriate, I think, you know, for office attire or anything like that. It comes on this kind of strange synthetic strap. I think it looks nice. Like, you know, this is, you know, the kind of like hard wearing material that kind of makes sense with this pilot watch idea, especially a modern one. But it just doesn't feel great, I have to say. You know, unfortunately, the watch doesn't like, it kind of wants to sit a little bit higher. Like this doesn't really break in very well. So I like the look of this kind of like, it's almost like a Kevlar ballistic nylon, but it just, you know, if this were my watch, I'd probably put it on a black leather or a brown leather strap, just something that's a little bit softer. One really nice detail about it, though, is the buckle, which would be cool to kind of transfer onto another strap if you had one. It's a titanium buckle with some nice details to it, some very like harsh little angles, just kind of like a little screw detail on there. The tang sits very flush on it, so it's actually a very nicely machined little piece, which I definitely would want to keep with the watch. It's just like a pairing. Yeah, it's also, you know, I mean, this is a $2,000 watch, and there's something about a synthetic strap like this which just doesn't quite speak to the price. I mean, obviously most of the price is coming from the movement, Swiss made, and the material of the case, but this just doesn't really speak to that richness. To wrap up, the Christopher Ward C1000 Typhoon is just, you know, another very cool watch from Christopher Ward. I really like to seeing them, you know, up their range a little bit. You know, we all love their watches that are under $1,000. They're very solid, but it's cool that they are trying things that might be more expensive, might be a little bit, you know, differing from where the brand started, but, you know, just kind of proves that this is a brand that can contend with, you know, more expensive, you know, kind of entry-level luxury brands, watches that would normally cost, you know, $4,500, $5,000, or even more, frankly. The biggest thing with this watch is the ceramic case. It is very, very nice. It isn't, like a life-changing thing. It's just a matte black that's very scratch resistant. It has a nice presence to it. Like I said, it is a little bit different than a DLC or a PVD, and I do like that it's very scratch resistant. I didn't try to scratch it, obviously, but I trust them when they say that it is very scratch resistant. And just overall, finish and quality of the build is very nice. Yeah, the only thing, like I said, that I wish is just like, I just wish it was a little bit more intense for some reason. Just a little bit more maybe memorable. I think they have all of these pilot watches in their kind of under $1,000 range, the C8s, and they're very nice. They're very simple pilot watches. I feel like if you're going to jump up another $1,000, and the watches that this is competing with, especially German watches like the Moscow or Sin, you have a much more aggressive style coming from them. And that's obviously not going to be appealing to everyone. That's just personally what I kind of wanted from this watch. And my favorite thing on the watch is actually on the case back, but that emblem is just super cool. Would have maybe liked a little bit more of that level of detail on the dial. Anyway, if you're looking for kind of a higher end chronograph, you like the idea of ceramic, and $2,000 sounds palatable to you, this is definitely a watch to look into. Please read the full review on Worn&Wound. Follow us on Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you.